Greetings. This is iVideo. My name is John Savers. I'm your host. iVideo is a program which takes a look at a history, broadly speaking. That is, we may look at, say, military history, or politics, or education. We may look at arts. We may look at science. We may look at games and so forth. But we do try to find something interesting to show you. We do try to be a little bit on the risky side, risk-taking if necessary. We are not somebody who will shrink from this sort of thing. And we do so not for sensational reasons, but for educational reasons, to bring light where it rarely shines, to find out what is hidden in the corners and so forth. Sometimes dark places are intentionally made that way, you know. So we try to find out what is there, and if something, what and where and how and so forth. Anyhow, we have begun a new series, as you know, on World War II, the camps, and we'll pick up on this particular program series at the area of the camps and the Nuremberg Trials and so forth, that particular aspect, which is important. After all, it is the decisions of the Nuremberg trial which became sort of the official world statement on the particular matter, and had a kind of a infallible aspect to it in the minds of many. You know, that everything that could be said had been said, truth had been found, and let's move on. But as I've mentioned in the past, having watched popular entertainment dwelling on World War II and seeing a kind of a snowballing aspect in regard to the importance of the camps and what became known as the Holocaust and so forth, I thought it was well to take a look at this particular aspect, and that is what we're doing. And for this particular purpose, then, let's move ahead, and I'd like you to consider the following as a starter. The story of the 6 million was given judicial authority at the Nuremberg Trials of German leaders between 1945 and 1949, proceedings which proved to be the most disgraceful legal farce in history. For a far more detailed study of the iniquities of these trials, which, as Field Marshal Montgomery said, made it a crime to lose a war, the reader is referred to the works cited below, and particularly to the outstanding book, Advance to Barbarism, Nelson, 1953, by the distinguished English lawyer F.J.P. Veal. This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 9. Now, people, many of you, and certainly a large number of the people out there, are not really interested in World War II. It's ancient history to you, not relevant and so forth. But however, there have been few events which have had a stronger influence on the United States of America and Europe in terms of political changes, economic changes, and even religious changes, cultural changes. This particular aspect is sort of untouched by the educational process. Therefore, most students who go through such history courses tend to be bored to tears because they really don't understand the forces which are active here, forces which are exciting to know about and which should be known about. And because of the tendentious and ineffective educational system, they do not really get, they only get what the established people want them to get, but they don't get the full picture. Serious omissions occur, and for that reason, we think it's excellent for people to bring things of this kind to light. We intend to do so here. Please consider. From the very outset, the Nuremberg Trials proceeded on the basis of gross statistical errors. In his speech of indictment on November 20, 1945, Mr. Sidney Alderman declared that there had been 9,600,000 Jews living in German-occupied Europe. Our earlier study has shown this figure to be wildly inaccurate. It is arrived at A, by completely ignoring all Jewish immigration between 1933 and 1945, and B, by adding all the Jews of Russia, including the 2 million or more who were never in German-occupied territory. The same inflated figure, slightly enlarged to 9,800,000, was produced again at the Eichmann trial in Israel by Professor Shalom Baron. This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 9. It should be noted parenthetically that even by the time of the Eichmann trials, responsible Jewish figures were already showing themselves willing to alter the figure. Please attend. The alleged 6 million victims first appeared as a foundation for the prosecution at Nuremberg, and after some dalliance with 10 million or more by the press at the time, it eventually gained international popularity and acceptance. It is very significant, however, that although this outlandish figure was able to win credence in the reckless atmosphere of recrimination in 1945, it had become no longer tenable by 1961 at the Eichmann trial. The Jerusalem court studiously avoided mentioning the figure of 6 million, and the charge drawn up by Mr. Gideon Hausner simply said, "some millions." This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 9. But let's leave that aside and get focused on the Nuremberg trials per se, shall we? Should anyone be misled into believing that the extermination of the Jews was proved at Nuremberg by evidence, he should consider the nature of the trials themselves, based as they were on a total disregard of sound legal principles of any kind. This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 9. Let me just interject here that although some people have posited a theory that the legal principles used at Nuremberg were basically Talmudic in nature or derivative thereof, I think that it is probably better just to put forth a viewpoint that this was closer to a lynching than anything else, and that there were no principles of law whatsoever from any source that should be mentioned, and that the connection with the Talmud should be dropped, I think. But at any rate, let's continue. Although the Nuremberg war crimes trials had become a mammoth event in history, not all of those who participated came away impressed with the execution of justice. For example, Charles F. Winterstrom, an Iowa Supreme Court justice who served as the presiding judge in the trial of German generals, told the Chicago Tribune on February 23, 1948, "If I had known 7 months ago what I know today, I would never have come here. The high ideals announced as the motives for creating these tribunals have not been evident. According to the judge, the entire atmosphere here is unwholesome. Lawyers, clerks, interpreters, and researchers were employed who became Americans only in recent years, whose backgrounds were embedded in Europe's hatreds and prejudices. Most of the evidence in the trials was documentary, selected from the large tonnage of captured records. The selection was made by the prosecution. The defense had access only to those documents which the prosecution considered material to the case. Wennerstrom left Nuremberg with a feeling that justice has been denied. This is a citation from The Facts and the Myths About the Holocaust, page 18. Now, people, it's this very same Judge Wennerstrom who flew back to America in disgust, and when he got here, he had stated that 90% of the Nuremberg court was composed of biased people, either on political or racial grounds, who helped the prosecution's case in every way. And indeed, this is certainly a trial that could rightly be considered a kangaroo court. But at any rate, or series of courts, I should say, perhaps. But at any rate, let's consider a little further. According to Earl Carroll, an American lawyer, 60% of the staff of the public prosecutor's office were German Jews who had left Germany after the promulgation of Hitler's race laws. He observed that not even 10% of the Americans employed at the Nuremberg courts were actually Americans by birth. The chief of the public prosecutor's office, who worked behind General Taylor, was Robert M. Kempner, a German Jewish immigrant. He was assisted by Morris Amkin. Mark Lowturn, who observed the trials, writes in his book, "They have all arrived, the Solomons, the Schlossbergers, and the Rabinoviches, members of the public prosecutor's staff." It is obvious from these facts that the fundamental legal principle that no man can sit in judgment on his own case was abandoned altogether. Worse, the majority of witnesses were also Jews when only a minority of the concentration camp inmates had been Jewish. According to Professor Maurice Bardèche, who was also an observer at the trials, the only concern of these witnesses was not to show their hatred too openly and to try and give an impression of objectivity. Nuremberg ou la terre promise, Paris, 1948, page 149. This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Pages 9 and 10. Well, now, were there any other principles of law which Americans pretend to honor, which were disregarded at these trials? Well, consider. U.S. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas, one of America's most respected liberal thinkers, had harsh words for the Nuremberg war crimes trials. "I thought at the time, and still think," he wrote, "that the Nuremberg trials were unprincipled. Law was created ex post facto to suit the passion and clamor of the time." This is a citation from The Facts and the Myths About the Holocaust, page 18. Well, I would like also to observe, perhaps parenthetically, that this tendency to ex post facto laws seems to be running more strongly in this country at this present time. Perhaps a kind of a snowballing from Nuremberg into our legal system becoming ever more evident. And I think it's one more sign that the Constitution of the United States of America is basically kind of like a Potemkin village. There's nothing really there. It just appears to be. But at any rate, many of you would say, well, look, I'm not interested in law anyhow that much. I don't understand it. It makes my head spin. Can you say anything that would make this more realistic, more understandable just to an ordinary fellow? Well, maybe. I don't know. We'll try. Please consider. Altogether more disturbing, however, were the methods employed to extract statements and confessions at Nuremberg, particularly those from SS officers, which were used to support the extermination charge. The American Senator Joseph McCarthy, in a statement given to the American press on May 20, 1949, drew attention to the following cases of torture to secure such confessions. In the prisoner Schwäbisch Hall, he stated, officers of the SS Leibstandart Adolf Hitler were flogged until they were soaked in blood, after which their sexual organs were trampled on as they lay prostrate on the ground. As in the notorious Malmedy trials of private soldiers, the prisoners were hoisted in the air and beaten until they signed the confessions demanded of them. On the basis of such confessions, extorted from SS generals Sepp Dietrich and Joachim Peiper, the Leibstandart was convicted as a guilty organization. In dealing with these cases, Senator McCarthy told the press, I have heard evidence and read documentary proofs to the effect that the accused persons were beaten up, maltreated, and physically tortured by methods which could only be conceived in sick brains. They were subjected to mock trials and pretended executions. They were told their families would be deprived of their ration cards. All these things were carried out with the approval of the public prosecutor in order to secure the psychological atmosphere necessary for the extortion of the required confessions. If the United States lets such acts committed by a few people go unpunished, then the whole world can rightly criticize us severely and forever doubt the correctness of our motives and our moral integrity. Now, this is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 10. Now, I would say, again parenthetically, that you might note the date that Senator Joseph McCarthy made this public in 1949, because I think that that statement of his probably was the statement that engendered the kind of hatred that eventually brought him down, which ruined his reputation, and which, after he was downed, of course, the press and books and all these other people, academic types, got in there to kick him as much as possible, much as Falstaff took out his knife and stabbed the dying, cold, cooling body of Hotspur so that he could claim that he had done the deed, that he had slain the mighty warrior Hotspur. But Hotspur had been killed by Prince Hal and not by Falstaff, and so that all was shown was lowness, and the same thing was shown by those people who attacked Senator McCarthy, in my view. But at any rate, please consider, we will continue. The methods of intimidation described were repeated during trials at Frankfurt am Main and at Dachau, and large numbers of Germans were convicted for atrocities on the basis of their admissions. The American judge Edward L. Van Roden, one of the 3 members of the Simpson Army Commission, which was subsequently appointed to investigate the methods of justice at the Dachau trials, revealed the methods by which these admissions were secured in the Washington Daily News, January 9, 1949. His account also appeared in the British newspaper, the Sunday Pictorial, January 23, 1949. The methods he described were posturing as priest to hear confessions and give absolution, torture with burning matches driven under the prisoner's fingernails, knocking out of teeth and breaking jaws, solitary confinement in near starvation rations. Van Roden explained, the statements which were admitted as evidence were obtained from men who had first been kept in solitary confinement for 3, 4, and 5 months. The investigators would put a black hood over the accused's head and then punch him in the face with brass knuckles, kick him, and beat him with rubber hoses. All but 2 of the Germans in the 139 cases we investigated had been kicked in the testicles beyond repair. This was standard operating procedure with our American investigators. This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 10. Now, some of you may feel indignation. I know that I do, but Many of you are a little bit more laid back than I am, but at any rate, for those of you who are indignant, would like to know a little bit about just who were doing these nasty deeds, consider. The American investigators responsible and who later functioned as the prosecution in the trials were Lieutenant Colonel Burton F. Ellis, Chief of the War Crimes Committee, and his assistants, Captain Raphael Shoemaker, Lieutenant Robert E. Byrne, Lieutenant William R. Pearl, Mr. Morris Elowitz, Mr. Harry Thon, and Mr. Kirschbaum. The legal advisors of the court was Colonel A.H. Rosenfeld. This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 10. Furthermore, please consider, despite the fact that confessions pertaining to the extermination of the Jews were extracted under these conditions, Nuremberg statements are still regarded as conclusive evidence for the 6 million by writers like Reitlinger and others, and the illusion is maintained that the trials were both impartial and impeccably fair. When General Taylor, the chief public prosecutor, was asked where he had obtained the figure of the 6 million, he replied that it was based on the confession of SS General Otto Ohlendorf. He, too, was tortured, and his case is examined below. But as far as such confessions in general are concerned, we can do no better than quote the British Sunday Pictorial when reviewing the report of Judge Van Roden. Strong men were reduced to broken wrecks, ready to mumble any admission demanded by their prosecutors. This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 10. Now I realize that some of you would be outraged at me for citing these matters and so forth, somehow thinking that this is all baloney. Enraged, thinking that it is a question of anti-Jewishness on my part or something of that sort. Let me say that that is a foolish opinion I have held, and anyone who thinks that I would go to the tremendous effort which I have done over the last several years, working days, working nights, living in the car and so forth, to put forth this kind of effort out of my own pocket for frivolous reasons is insane. This is done as an educational effort. It's done with a sense of righteousness, and it's done with purpose. If you do not like what it is being aired, get the hints. But let us consider. The document quoted most frequently in support of the legend of the 6 million, and which figures largely in Polyakoff's and Wolff's Das Dritte Reich und die Juden, Document und Aufsatz, is a statement of SS Captain Dieter Wiesleisny, an assistant in Adolf Eichmann's office and later the Gestapo chief in Slovakia. It was obtained under conditions even more extreme than those described above, for Wiesleisny fell into the hands of Czech communist and was interrogated at the Soviet-controlled Bratislava prison in November 1946. Subjected to torture, Wiesleisny was reduced to a nervous wreck and became addicted to uncontrollable fits of sobbing for hours on end prior to his execution. Although the conditions under which his statement was obtained empty it entirely of all plausibility, Polyakoff prefers to ignore this and merely writes, in prison he wrote several memoirs that contain information of great interest. Harvest of Hate, page 3. These memoirs include some genuine statements of fact to provide authenticity, such as that Himmler was an enthusiastic advocate of Jewish immigration and that the immigration of Jews from Europe continued throughout the war, but in general they are typical of the communist-style confession produced at Soviet show trials. Frequent reference is made to exterminating Jews, and a flagrant attempt is made to implicate as many SS leaders as possible. Factual errors are also common, notably the statement that the war with Poland added more than 3 million Jews to the German-occupied territory, which we have disproved above. This is a citation from Did 6 Million Really Die? Page 10. Well, that's it. We've run out of time. This is iVideo. My name is John Savers. I'm your host. I thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you again next time.